If you had told me at 52 that my entire life was a beautifully constructed stage play, and I was the only one who didn't know her lines were a lie, I would have laughed. A warm, trusting laugh from a woman who believed she was standing on solid ground. The truth is, the ground beneath me had been slowly, deliberately, hollowed out for years. I just didn't hear the echo in my own footsteps. My name is Ruth, and this is the story of how I was treated like a fool, but I walked out victorious. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. It all started, as these things often do, not with a bang, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the light. I was 52, married to David for 28 years. 28 years. That's a lifetime. It's more than half of my life now, spent with one man. We built a life, a home, a business, a successful interior design firm called Harmony Homes. The name makes me wince now. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a trowel. David was the face of the business, the charisma, the man who could charm the most reticent client into signing on the dotted line. And I was the engine room. I was the one who stayed up late sourcing fabrics, who managed the accounts, who soothed the frantic subcontractors, who ensured the vision in our clients' heads became the reality they could live in. I was the foundation, you see? The part of the house that's buried, that's never seen, but without which the whole beautiful structure collapses into the dirt. We lived in a lovely 4-bedroom house in a nice, tree-lined suburb. It was a home filled with the artifacts of our life together. Pottery we'd bought on a trip to Santa Fe, a bookshelf sagging with my novels and his business biographies, photographs of us smiling on various beaches. It felt real. It felt permanent. The first memory I want to share with you isn't of a fight or a discovery. It's of a perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening, about 6 months before the world fell apart. It's a snapshot of the before time. I was in the kitchen, the warm, fragrant heart of our home. I was making David's favorite beef bourguignon. The rich smell of wine and herbs and seared meat filled the air. The radio was playing some soft classical music, and the golden hour light was streaming through the bay window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I remember feeling a deep, unshakable sense of contentment. This was it. This was the reward for all the hard years. This comfortable, quiet love. David came home at his usual time, 6:30 on the dot. He dropped his briefcase by the door, the way he always did, and came into the kitchen. He kissed my cheek. "Smells amazing in here, Ruthie," he said, his voice warm. "It'll be ready in 20, I said, smiling, wiping my hands on my apron. "How was your day?" He sighed, loosening his tie. It was a silk tie, navy blue with tiny silver dots. I'd bought it for him for his last birthday. "Oh, you know, the usual, met with the Henderson clients. They're a tough nut to crack, wanted everything but wanted to pay for nothing." I laughed. "Well, send them my way tomorrow. I'll work my magic on the budget. We can find some alternatives for the marble." He looked at me then, and his smile it was the same smile I'd seen for 28 years. Or was it? Was there a flicker of something else behind his eyes? A hesitation? Or is that just a ghost I'm putting there now, haunting my own memories with the knowledge of what was to come? "You're a wonder, Ruth," he said, and he poured himself a scotch. "I don't know what I'd do without you." They were the right words. They were the words he'd said 1,000 times. But that night they felt rehearsed, like a line from a play he was tired of performing. We sat down to eat. The conversation was easy, familiar. We talked about the business, about a neighbor who was moving, about maybe planning a trip to Italy in the fall. The Amalfi Coast, David said, his eyes lighting up. I was looking at pictures online today. Those white villages clinging to the cliffs. We deserve that, don't you think, after all our hard work? It sounds heavenly, I said, my heart swelling with the prospect. We could rent a villa for a week, just do nothing but eat and look at the sea. Exactly, he said, reaching for the wine bottle to refill my glass. I'll look into it seriously. I'll handle all the bookings. You have enough on your plate. It was a generous offer, a loving offer. For 28 years I would have taken it at face value. But that night, a tiny, insistent voice in the back of my mind, a voice I had spent a lifetime learning to ignore, whispered, "He doesn't want you to see the credit card statements. He doesn't want you involved in the finances for the trip." I shook the thought away. It was ugly, paranoid. That's what I told myself. You're being paranoid, Ruth. This is David, you're David. This was the foundation of my foolishness. Not a lack of intelligence, but a surplus of trust. I had built my life on the bedrock of our partnership. To question it was to risk a seismic crack in my very reality. So, I didn't question it. I sipped my wine, I savored the stew, and I agreed with my husband about the color of the walls we should suggest for the Hendersons. Later that week, I was in our home office, paying bills. This was my domain. The filing cabinets, the neatly labeled folders, the humming computer. This was where I turned the chaos of invoices and receipts into order. David's laptop was on the desk, too. He'd forgotten it. He usually took it with him, but that morning he'd been in a rush. I didn't think anything of it. I wasn't a snoop. I believed in privacy, even in a marriage. But as I reached for a stamp, my elbow knocked a stack of papers off the desk. As I bent to gather them, a single sheet, tucked between a printer manual and an old contract, caught my eye. It was a bank statement, but not from our joint business account, not from our joint personal account. It was from a bank I didn't recognize, and the account was in David's name only. My heart did a little stutter step. That's the only way I can describe it. Not a full-on panic, just a trip, a stumble. It's a business account for a new project, I reasoned. He's probably planning to surprise me. Maybe it's for the Italy trip, a separate fund? But the activity on the statement told a different story. There were regular, sizable deposits. And then, just 2 days prior, a single, massive withdrawal. $50,000 gone. $50,000. I sat back on my heels, the paper trembling in my hand. The room seemed to tilt slightly. This was the first real crack, hairline but deep, snaking across my beautiful, solid floor. Find everything you need? I jumped, clutching the statement to my chest as if it were a stolen diamond. David stood in the doorway, his coat still on. He'd come back for the laptop. His eyes went from my face, which I'm sure was pale as milk, to the paper in my hand. There was a moment, a fraction of a second, where his face was utterly unguarded. I saw it, not surprise, not annoyance. I saw fear. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a mask of mild curiosity. "What's that, honey?" he asked, his voice perfectly calm. I knocked your papers over," I stammered, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. This fell out. What is this account, David?" He walked over, not with guilt, but with an air of gentle exasperation. He took the paper from my hand, his fingers brushing mine. They were cold. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Ruth, I was going to tell you about this," he sighed, shaking his head. "It's the Henderson retainer. They insisted on paying it into a separate account. They're funny about these things. Superstitious. Think if it goes into the main business account, the tax man will somehow find it sooner. He laughed, a soft, dismissive sound. You know how these old money types are. He folded the statement and put it in his inside jacket pocket. The withdrawal is for that special ordered Italian marble they insisted on. I had to pay the supplier directly overseas. It's all a bit of a headache, to be honest. I was handling it so you wouldn't have to worry about the international transfer nonsense. He looked down at me, still kneeling on the floor. His expression was one of fond pity. You look so serious. Did you think I was hiding a secret gambling habit? He chuckled, and just like that, the crack was sealed over. The explanation was so plausible, so perfectly tailored to my expectations. The Hendersons were eccentric. David was protective of me, often shielding me from the more tedious aspects of the business. He reached a hand down and pulled me to my feet. You work too hard, Ruthie, he said, his voice soft. You see shadows where there are none. Come on, let me make you a cup of tea. Forget about all this boring paperwork. He put his arm around me and led me out of the office. I went, willingly, back into the warm, well-lit kitchen. I let him make me tea. I let him tell me a funny story about his barista that morning. I laughed in all the right places, but I couldn't forget. The shadow had been cast, and for the first time in 28 years, I had looked at the man I loved and known with a chilling certainty that he had just looked me straight in the eye and lied to me. The foundation was no longer solid, and I was no longer the fool who didn't know it. I was the fool who was just beginning to understand the depth of her own foolishness, and that was a much, much more dangerous thing to be. A lie, once suspected, is like a single thread pulled from a sweater. You can try to ignore it, to tuck it back in, to tell yourself the garment is still perfectly sound. But your eye is drawn to it, again and again. And you know with a sinking feeling in your gut that if you pull on it, the whole thing might unravel. For weeks after the bank statement incident, I walked through my life with a new, hyper-vigilant awareness. I was watching, listening, feeling for vibrations. David was David. He was affectionate, he was engaged, he talked about Italy with a sparkle in his eye. He brought me flowers for no reason. He was in fact the perfect husband. And that, in itself, became suspicious. The flowers felt less like a gift and more like a distraction, a beautiful, fragrant smoke screen. The business, Harmony Homes, chugged along. We landed the Henderson project, and true to David's word, they were demanding. I threw myself into the work, finding a perverse comfort in the tangibility of fabric swatches, paint samples, and floor plans. These things were real. You could touch them. You couldn't lie about the color cerulean or the texture of raw silk. It was during the initial planning for the Hendersons' master bathroom that I had my first real conversation with my aunts, Grace and Clara. They weren't really my aunts, but my mother's dearest friends. They had been my surrogate mothers since my own parents passed away 10 years ago within 6 months of each other. Losing them had felt like having my moorings cut, and David had become my entire world. Aunts Grace and Clara were the lighthouses on my shore, each with a very different beam. I was at Auntie Grace's house, a cozy cottage that always smelled of cinnamon and lavender. We were having tea in her sun-drenched parlor, surrounded by her sprawling collection of African violets. "You're quiet today, my dear," Grace said, her voice as soft as the cashmere shawl she always wore. She had a way of looking at you that felt like a warm embrace. "Is everything all right with David? The business?" I stirred my tea, the spoon clinking softly against the fine china. How could I put the unease into words? I had no proof, just a feeling, a cold, slick feeling in the pit of my stomach. I don't know, Auntie Grace. I started, my voice hesitant. It's probably nothing. It's just, David has been different. Different how? She asked, her kind eyes full of concern. More attentive. More perfect. And there was this bank statement. I told her the story, downplaying my own suspicion, framing it as my own silly paranoia. "Oh, Ruth," she said, reaching over and patting my hand. Her skin was papery and warm. "You've been under so much stress, and 28 years is a long time. People get comfortable, they have little secrets. It doesn't mean anything. David adores you. He's a good man. I've always thought so. Remember how he took care of you when your mother died?" She was doing what she always did, seeking the most comforting, least confrontational explanation. She was soothing the thread back into the sweater. And a part of me, the part that was terrified of what I might find, wanted desperately to believe her. Later that day, I went to see Auntie Clara. Her environment was the antithesis of Grace's. Her apartment was minimalist, all clean lines and muted colors. It smelled of lemon polish and discipline. She was pruning a bonsai tree with a pair of tiny, sharp scissors when I arrived. I didn't even have to bring it up. She looked up at me over her reading glasses, her gaze sharp and assessing. "You've got a worry line between your eyebrows that wasn't there last month. Spit it out." So I did. I told her the same story, but with Clara, I didn't downplay it. I let the fear and the suspicion show in my voice. When I finished, she snipped a final, precise cut from the tiny tree and set her scissors down. She didn't reach for my hand. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. "A separate bank account," she stated, her voice flat. "And a flimsy story about superstitious clients. And now he's showering you with affection." She picked up her teacup, took a slow sip. "Ruth, my dear, you are not a hysterical woman. You are one of the most level-headed people I know. If your gut is telling you something is wrong, it is because something is wrong." Her words were like a splash of cold water. They were the opposite of Grace's comfort. They were a confirmation. "But what should I do?" I whispered, my throat tight. "What you've always done," Clara said. "You are the engine room. You are the one who deals in facts, in numbers, in reality. So go and get the facts. Stop looking for reassurance and start looking for evidence. But be prepared. When you go looking for a monster, you have to be ready to find one." Her words chilled me to the bone. Evidence. The word sounded so clinical, so adversarial. It was a word for courtrooms and detective stories, not for a 28-year marriage, but she was right. The not knowing was a special kind of torture. I had to know. The opportunity came a week later. David was away on a networking trip to a design conference in Chicago. He'd been vague about the details, which was unusual. He usually loved to talk about these trips, the speakers he'd seen, the new trends. The house was eerily quiet without him. The silence seemed to amplify the voice in my head. Get the facts, look for evidence. With a heart hammering against my ribs, I went into the home office. I started with what I knew. Our joint accounts were clean, orderly, nothing amiss. But Clara's words echoed in my mind. Stop looking for reassurance and start looking for evidence. I turned to David's laptop. He had a password, but I knew it. It was our wedding anniversary. The irony was a bitter pill. I typed in the numbers, and the screen unlocked, revealing his meticulously organized desktop. I felt like a criminal. My hands were shaking. Every click of The mouse felt like a betrayal of a sacred trust. But I pushed on, driven by a fear that was now greater than my guilt. I went through his email. Most of it was business-related, mundane. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. But then I found a folder, labeled simply H. Inside, a series of emails from an address I didn't recognize, maya.jensen@post.com. The subject lines were innocuous: meeting follow-up, client query, design reference. I opened the first one. David, it was wonderful to see you last week. I can't stop thinking about our conversation. You have such a fascinating perspective on mid-century modernism. Looking forward to continuing our discussion in Chicago. It could have been professional, but the tone. It was too personal, too intimate. My mouth went dry. I opened the next one, sent a day before his trip. David, I've booked the hotel you suggested. I can't wait. 2 whole days with you, away from everything. It feels like a dream. Don't forget the champagne. Yours. The room swam. I gripped the edge of the desk. Yours. Chicago. The networking trip. It wasn't a lie. He was networking, just not the kind I had imagined. I felt physically sick. I stumbled to the small bathroom connected to the office and vomited into the toilet. The betrayal was a physical blow, robbing me of breath, of warmth. Tears streamed down my face, hot and shameful. Maya, when the nausea subsided, a cold, hard clarity took its place. This was the tremor that preceded the earthquake. The affair was bad enough, a shattering of my heart. But my mind, my practical, engine room mind, was already making connections. The separate bank account, the large withdrawals. This wasn't just an affair, this was a double life. And double lives are expensive. I went back to the laptop, my tears drying into a grim resolve. I was no longer a wife snooping on her husband. I was a forensic accountant on the trail of embezzlement. I searched his files for any mention of Maya Jensen. I found a scanned contract. He had hired her 6 months ago as a freelance design consultant. Her rate was exorbitant. And the payments, I cross-referenced, were being made from the secret account. He wasn't just sleeping with her, he was paying her. And he was funding it with money that was half mine, money that was meant for our future, for our retirement, for a villa on the Amalfi Coast. The next email I found was the one that turned my heartbreak into pure, unadulterated fury. It was from David to Maya, sent just a few hours before he left for the airport. My dearest Maya, don't worry about a thing. Ruth is completely in the dark. She's so buried in fabric samples and paint charts, she wouldn't notice if I walked in with a neon sign over my head. She trusts me implicitly. It's almost pathetic. See you soon, my love. Can't wait to hold you. Pathetic. The word echoed in the silent room. It was the final, brutal confirmation of what I had become in my own husband's eyes. Not a partner, not the engine of his success. A fool, a pathetic fool who trusted him. I didn't cry anymore. I sat there in the dark office, the blue light of the laptop screen illuminating my face. The kind, trusting, contented Ruth of that Tuesday evening, making beef bourguignon, was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, angrier. The first tremor had hit, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the earthquake was coming. And this time, I would not be standing on a foundation of sand. I would be the one holding the seismograph, and I would be ready. There's a certain kind of silence that descends after a world-ending discovery. It's not a peaceful silence. It's a thick, heavy blanket that smothers sound and thought and feeling. For 3 days after I found the emails, I moved through my life like a ghost in my own home. I cooked meals I couldn't eat. I answered emails for Harmony Homes with robotic efficiency. I watered the plants. I even paid the bills, my hands moving by muscle memory while my mind was 1,000 miles away. In a Chicago hotel room, I could picture with devastating, unwelcome clarity. The shock was a protective cocoon. It allowed me to function while my soul tried to stitch itself back together around the new horrifying reality. David, my David, saw me as pathetic. He was with another woman. And he was stealing from me. On the 4th day, the cocoon cilia, it didn't crack. It was violently torn open by the sound of David's key in the front door. He was back. I was in the kitchen, clutching the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. I heard his familiar footsteps in the hall, the sound of his suitcase being set down. He walked into the kitchen, a smile on his face, a tan from, what? A Chicago Conference Center, or walks along Lake Michigan with her? Ruthie. I'm home, he said, his voice booming with a false heartiness. He came towards me, to kiss me. I flinched. It was an involuntary spasm, a recoil from a venomous snake. I couldn't help it. His smile faltered. Whoa, honey. You okay? You look pale. You look pale. The concern in his voice was a masterclass in acting. It made me want to scream. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the tiny lines around his eyes that I used to trace with my finger. I saw the way his collar sat slightly askew. I saw the man I had loved for nearly 3 decades. And for a dizzying second, I thought maybe I had dreamed it all. Maybe I was hysterical. Maybe Auntie Grace was right. But then I saw it. A tiny, almost invisible smudge of pink gloss on the collar of his white shirt. A color I would never wear. The ghost of her mouth, marking what was supposed to be mine. The scream built in my throat, a hot, painful pressure. I wanted to rake my nails down his face. I wanted to throw every piece of the pottery we'd bought in Santa Fe at his head. I wanted to shatter this beautiful, false life into a million pieces. But Auntie. Clara's voice cut through the red haze in my mind, cool and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. When you go looking for a monster, you have to be ready to find one. And you never, ever let the monster know you're hunting it. I took a breath, a shaky, ragged thing. I forced my hands to unclench from the counter. I even managed a weak smile. I'm just tired, David, I said, my voice a tremulous whisper. I think I might be coming down with something. A migraine. I brought a hand to my temple, and the tremor in it was real. How was the conference? The relief that washed over his face was palpable. The danger had passed. The pathetic, trusting wife was back in her box. He launched into a detailed, utterly fabricated story about keynote speakers and product demonstrations. He name-dropped designers I knew for a fact hadn't been there. Every word was a lie, polished and delivered with the ease of long practice. I listened, nodding in what I hoped were the right places, while inside, a new part of me was being forged in fire and ice. The actress. The spy in my own home. That night, lying beside him in our king-sized bed, the chasm between us felt vast enough to hold an ocean. He fell asleep almost instantly, his breathing deep and even. I lay rigid, staring at the ceiling, the space between our bodies radiating a cold I felt in my bones. This was my life now. A performance. A war conducted in whispers and hidden bank statements. The next morning, I put phase 1 of Clara's bluntly delivered plan into action. I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Sarah Jenkins, a name Clara had dug up from her network of formidable women. "She's a barracuda in a pinstripe suit," Clara had said with what sounded like admiration. "She eats men like David for breakfast." Sitting in Sarah Jenkins's immaculate, intimidating office a day later, I felt small and exposed. She was a woman in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob and eyes that missed nothing. I told her my story, my voice shaking at first, then growing steadier as I laid out the facts: the secret account, the $50,000 withdrawal, the emails, Maya Jensen. I showed her the printouts I'd secretly made from David's laptop. She read them, her expression unchanging. When I finished, she set the papers down neatly on her glass desk and steepled her fingers. "Ruth," she said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact, "what you have here is enough for me to strongly advise you to file for divorce on the grounds of adultery and financial dissipation. However," she leaned forward slightly, "it's not enough to guarantee you get what you are entitled to. Adultery, in the eyes of this state's law, is often treated as a he said, she said marital fault. It can influence a judge's sympathy, but it doesn't always directly impact the financial settlement." She tapped the printout about the $50,000. "This is what we care about. This and whatever else he's hidden. We need to follow the money. We need to prove a pattern of intentional hiding and wasting of marital assets. My advice is threefold. First, you continue your domestic intelligence gathering. Be the perfect, trusting wife. Second, I will have my forensic accountant, a man named Arthur Lynn, look into your finances. He's a bloodhound. He'll find what we've missed. And third," she paused, her gaze level, "we need to document the affair, visually. I need you to hire a private investigator." A private investigator. The words were so sordid, so final. They meant this was real. This was a battle. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Good," Sarah said, a faint, grim smile touching her lips. "Now, listen to me carefully. From this moment on, you are a safe. You do not react. You do not confront. You do not give him any indication that you are anything other than the woman he believes you to be. You are gathering the combination to the lock, and when we have it, we will open you up and everything he has tried to hide will come spilling out." Understood? I understood. I was to become a vault, sealed shut, containing all my rage, my hurt, my betrayal. I was to smile at the man who thought me pathetic and let him dig his own grave, one secret at a time. Living that lie was the hardest thing I have ever done. The next few weeks were a masterclass in emotional torture. David, emboldened by my continued ignorance, grew almost giddy with the success of his deception. He would take phone calls in another room, saying it was a difficult client. He'd leave the house for business dinners and come home smelling of a perfume that was cheap and cloying, nothing like the subtle fragrances I wore. One evening, he was showing me a new design app on his phone when a text message popped up at the top of the screen. Missing you. Can't wait for Friday night. My place? I'll wear the red lingerie you like. I saw it. He saw that I saw it. There was a frozen, heart-stopping moment. The air in the room vanished. His thumb darted out and swiped the notification away. He gave a forced, nervous laugh. "God, these spam bots are getting aggressive. It's all those online forms you have to fill out." I looked at him, and I summoned every ounce of my acting ability. I let my eyes widen with innocent curiosity. Red lingerie? That's a very specific spam bot. I even managed a light teasing laugh. "Should I be worried, Mr. Miller?" The tension drained from his shoulders. He chuckled, a real, relieved sound. "Oh, Ruthie, you're priceless." He leaned over and kissed my forehead. "You have no idea how much I love that about you." "Oh, I have an idea," I thought, the smile still plastered on my face. "You love that I'm a fool." The P. I, a quiet, efficient man named Leo, cost a small fortune, but within a week he delivered. A stack of photographs. David and Maya, a woman in her early 30s with long, artificially blonde hair, entering a nondescript apartment building. David and Maya, laughing in a dimly lit wine bar, his hand on her knee. David and Maya, kissing in a parked car a block from our Harmony Homes office. Seeing the photos was like being punched in the gut. It was one thing to read the words, another to see the physical reality of his betrayal. The way he looked at her, with a kind of hungry possessiveness, it was a look I hadn't seen from him in years. But it wasn't the heartbreak that solidified my resolve. It was the location of the apartment building. It was in a new, luxury development downtown. An address that was far too expensive for a freelance design consultant. An address I would soon learn that David was paying for. The real bombshell, however, came from Arthur Lynn, the forensic accountant. He called me one afternoon while I was at a fabric warehouse. "Mrs. Miller?" he said, his voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "I've completed my preliminary review. I think you should come to my office. There are significant discrepancies." Sitting in Arthur's windowless, number-filled office was like stepping into the matrix of my own destruction. Spreadsheets and flow charts were displayed on a large monitor. "Starting about 3 years ago," Arthur began, pointing with a laser pen, "your husband began a process of systematic fund diversion." The red dot danced across the screen. "He created a shell company, Apex Design Solutions, registered to a P.O. box. Large payments from several of your major clients were rerouted to Apex. From Apex, the funds were transferred to the separate account you discovered and 2 others I've located." He clicked to a new chart. "In the last 18 months, since his relationship with Miss Jensen began, the outflows have increased dramatically. The $50,000 withdrawal was for a down payment on a luxury vehicle, a sports car, registered in her name. There are regular payments for her apartment's rent, luxury clothing stores, spa memberships, and 5-star hotel charges." He clicked again. "Most concerningly, he has taken out a second mortgage on the Harmony Homes business line of credit. He used the funds to purchase a condominium in a waterfront development. The title is in his name only." The numbers swirled in front of me. It wasn't just an affair, it was an empire of lies. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was dismantling the business we had built together, brick by brick, to build a gilded cage for his mistress. The life we had planned, the retirement, the security, it was all being liquidated to fund his double life. I thought I had known the depth of his betrayal. I was wrong. This was so much worse. This was financial evisceration. I drove home from that meeting in a trance. The web of lies wasn't just a few sticky threads. It was a fully constructed trap, and I had been sleeping soundly in the center of it for years. The foundation wasn't just cracked, it was gone, replaced by a bottomless pit of deception. When I walked into the house, David was in the living room, feet up, watching a game, a beer in his hand. He looked so comfortable, so entitled to this life, to my life. He smiled at me. "There you are. Where have you been?" "I was thinking, for the Henderson project, we should use that new imported Italian tile in the foyer. really make a statement. He was talking about Italian tile. With money he was simultaneously stealing from me and spending on another woman. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I loved. I saw the monster Clara had warned me about. And I knew the hunt was nearly over. I had the combination to the safe. Now, it was almost time to blow it wide open. There is a unique and special hell reserved for the moment you come face to face with the person who has been instrumental in your undoing. It's not the dramatic, hair-pulling confrontation you see in movies. It's quieter, stranger, and it leaves a stain on your soul that never quite washes out. For me, that hell was a Tuesday afternoon in a sterile, brightly lit grocery store in the organic produce section, of all places. I was there because David had casually mentioned a craving for arugula and goat cheese salad. The actor in me, the vault, had noted it and added it to the mental list of wifely duties I performed to maintain the facade. I was staring at a bundle of asparagus, trying to remember if he still liked it, when I felt a presence beside me. "Oh, excuse me, can you reach one of those for me?" a woman's voice asked, lightly. I always seem to get the bruised ones. I looked up, and there she was, Maya Jensen. I recognized her instantly from Leo's photographs, but in person, she was different, softer, younger. She had a scattering of freckles across her nose that the camera hadn't picked up, and her eyes were a warm hazel. She was holding a wicker basket and smiling at me, a polite, stranger-to-stranger smile. She had no idea who I was. My heart didn't just pound. It seemed to stop entirely, then kick-start into a frantic, painful gallop. The air grew thick. The cheerful muzak from the store speakers warped into a dissonant drone. This was the woman. This was the body attached to the name in the emails, the face in the photographs. This was the recipient of the $50,000 sports car, the luxury apartment, the chunks of my life that David had carved away and handed to her. I must have stared for a second too long, because her smile became slightly uncertain. "The arugula?" she prompted gently. "Of course," I managed, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. I reached for a plastic clamshell of arugula from the top shelf and handed it to her. Our fingers didn't touch. "Thank you so much," she said, dropping it into her basket. "I'm hopelessly short. My boyfriend always teases me about it." She gave a little, self-deprecating laugh. A laugh that was meant for David. Boyfriend. The word was a physical blow. I felt the carefully constructed walls of my vault shudder. "It's no trouble," I said, forcing my own smile. The actress was back, but this was her most demanding role yet. "It's nice to have someone to reach the high shelves for you. Isn't it just?" she agreed, her eyes sparkling. She was happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. She had no idea that the man who made her happy was a thief and a liar. Or did she? Was she a willing accomplice, or just another one of his pawns? We stood there for a moment, two women in the produce section, a chasm of betrayal between us that only I could see. "I'm Maya, by the way," she said, extending her hand. I took it. My skin was cold. "Ruth," I said. The name meant nothing to her, not a flicker of recognition. David had kept me so thoroughly erased from his other life that I was just a polite, middle-aged woman helping her in a grocery store. The pathetic wife was so insignificant, she wasn't even a ghost in their world. "Well, thanks again, Ruth," she said, giving my hand a little squeeze before letting go. "You have a great day." "You too, Maya," I said and watched her walk away, her ponytail swinging, her basket filled with the ingredients for a life that was built on the ruins of mine. I left my cart right there, filled with the food for the husband I was pretending to love, and I walked out of the store. I made it to my car, locked the doors, and finally, I fell apart. The sobs were ripped from a place so deep inside me I didn't know it existed. They were ragged, ugly, gasping things. I cried for the sheer, surreal horror of it. I cried for the casual way she had said, boyfriend. I cried because she seemed nice. And that made it all so much worse. If she had been a villain, it would have been simpler, but she was just a young woman, smiling in the grocery store, in love with a man who was a fiction. When the storm passed, leaving me hollowed out and raw, a new chilling clarity emerged. I couldn't hate her, not yet, not fully, because a terrible, calculating thought was beginning to form. What if she didn't know? What if David had spun her a web of lies, too? What if she was just another fool in his grand performance? The thought was dangerous. It humanized the enemy. But it also presented an opportunity, a weapon. I didn't go home. I drove to Clara's apartment. I found her repotting a fierce-looking cactus. I didn't even say hello. I just stood in her doorway and said, I met her. Clara looked up, her sharp eyes missing, nothing the puffy eyes, the tremor in my hands. And I told her. The arugula, the introduction, the word boyfriend, my breakdown in the car. Clara listened, her expression granite. When I finished, she wiped her hands on a towel. There are two possibilities, she stated, her tone clinical. 1. She is a greedy, a moral young woman who knows he's married and doesn't care as long as the money flows. 2. He has told her a story. That he's trapped in a loveless marriage, that you're unstable, that he's leaving you but it's complicated, that the money is all his. Which do you think is more likely? I thought of her smile. It hadn't seemed calculating. It seemed open. The second, I whispered. I think it's the second. Good, Clara said. That makes her a potential asset, not just an adversary. A scorned woman who discovers she's been played is a formidable source of information. But you cannot approach her. Not yet. The timing has to be perfect. The timing came sooner than any of us expected. A week later, Leo, the P.I., called. His voice was tense. Mrs. Miller, I think you need to see this. He's at her apartment now. There's a lot of shouting. My audio guy has a feed. It sounds like a major blow-up. I drove to a nondescript van parked a block from Maya's building. Leo let me in and handed me a pair of headphones. My hands were shaking as I put them on. And I heard it. The sound of my husband's other life imploding. You lied to me, David. Maya's voice was shrill, tear-filled. You said the divorce was almost final. You said she was getting nothing. But my friend saw your wife at a charity luncheon last week, and she was wearing her wedding ring. She looked perfectly happy. Maya, lower your voice, David snapped, his tone cold and controlling. The tone he used on difficult clients. The tone he had never ever used on me. It is complicated. The legalities. Don't you legalities me. I looked it up. There's no divorce filing. None. You're not leaving her, are you? You've just been renting me. Don't be dramatic. This is about the money, isn't it? The condo, the car, it's not enough. You need a piece of paper, too? I love you, she wailed, and the sound was one of genuine gut-wrenching pain. I thought you loved me. You told me you loved me. You said your marriage was a business arrangement. You said she was simple. Simple. The word was a brand. I flinched. This is a business arrangement. David roared. and I heard something shatter. A glass, maybe. A very expensive one. So stop with the hysterics and be grateful for what you have. There was a moment of silence, then a low, wounded sob. Get out, Maya whispered. Get out, David. I don't want your money. I don't want your lies. Get out. I heard a door slam with such force it vibrated through the audio feed. Then, nothing but the sound of a woman's heart breaking. I took off the headphones. My own heart was pounding, but not with pain. With a fierce, vindictive thrill, the pawn had just turned on the king. Leo, I said, my voice steady for the first time. In weeks. I need you to wait. When she leaves, probably to go to a friend's or a hotel, I need you to follow her. I need to know where she is. The monster had shown his teeth to his other victim, and it was time to offer her a way out of the cage. It was time to turn David's web of lies into his own prison. There is a particular flavor of cruelty that comes not from a heated argument, but from a cold, calculated piece of paper. It's the cruelty of bureaucracy, of the law, where words on a page can dismantle your life with more efficiency than any shouted insult. I learned this on a bright, sunny Thursday morning when the doorbell rang. I was in the middle of a client call for the Henderson project, discussing the merits of a hand-scraped oak floor versus a polished concrete one. The doorbell was an interruption, an annoyance. I told Mrs. Henderson I'd call her back and went to answer it, my mind still half on flooring substrates. A man in a uniform stood there, holding a slim, legal-sized envelope. Ruth Miller, he asked. Yes? I said, my brow furrowed. You've been served. He thrust the envelope into my hands, turned on his heel, and walked briskly back to his double-parked car. Served. The word echoed in the quiet foyer. I looked down at the envelope. It was addressed to me, from the offices of a law firm I didn't recognize. With a sinking feeling that started in the soles of my feet and rushed up to my scalp, I tore it open. The words swam before my eyes. Petition for dissolution of marriage. David Miller versus Ruth Miller. He had filed for divorce. He had filed. I stumbled into the living room and collapsed onto the sofa, the papers rustling in my trembling hands. I scanned the pages, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then I saw it. The reason for the preemptive strike. The narrative he was constructing. Under the section for the reason for the dissolution, he had checked irreconcilable differences. Standard. But it was the accompanying affidavit that made the blood drain from my face. In stark black and white type, David had sworn under oath that I, Ruth Miller, had been a disengaged and uninvolved partner in the marital business, Harmony Homes, that I had contributed little to its financial success, that I had squandered marital funds on personal extravagances. He requested sole ownership of Harmony Homes, citing the need to preserve the business he had built, and offered me a paltry, insulting monthly support payment that wouldn't have covered the property taxes on our home, which he also requested to be awarded to him. It was a character assassination, a complete and utter rewriting of our 28-year history. He had taken my role as the engine room and painted it as dead weight. He had taken my trust and recast it as laziness. He had taken my frugality, the countless hours I'd spent hunting for deals on fabrics and fixtures to maximize our profit, and twisted it into profligate spending. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. But the masterstroke, the detail that revealed the depth of his cunning, was the attached ex parte motion. He had asked the court, without even notifying me, to freeze all our joint assets and our business accounts, citing the imminent risk that I would dissipate and waste the marital estate. He had cut me off at the knees, financially, legally, and reputationally. all while I was still playing the part of the trusting wife, buying his arugula. The actor in me shattered. The vault burst open. A raw, guttural sound tore from my throat, a cry of pure, undiluted rage and betrayal. I swept my arm across the coffee table, sending a ceramic vase we'd bought in Mexico crashing to the floor, scattering shards and water and lilies like the pieces of my life. This was his move. He knew. He had to know that I knew. The text message, my flinch when he tried to kiss me, he had seen through my performance. And rather than wait for me to make my move, he had launched a nuclear first strike, designed to leave me penniless, defenseless, and painted as a gold-digging hysteric. I fumbled for my phone. My vision blurred with tears of fury. I called Sarah Jenkins. Her assistant put me straight through. "Sarah," I gasped, barely able to form words. He filed. "He's frozen everything. He's saying I never did anything for the business, that I'm a spendthrift." "Breathe, Ruth." Sarah's voice was calm, a steel cable in my hurricane of emotion. "I expected this. It's a classic move from his type. He's trying to control the narrative and starve you out before you can respond. Where are you?" "At home." "Good. Listen to me carefully. Do not leave the house. Do not try to access any accounts. That's what he wants, to be able to tell the judge you're acting erratically. I am filing a response this afternoon to unfreeze the assets, and I will include a motion for temporary spousal support. We will also file a counter-petition citing adultery and financial fraud. He has started this war, but we will finish it. But the things he's saying about me, people will believe him. People don't matter. The judge matters. And judges see through this kind of theatrical bullshit every single day. We have the evidence, Ruth. We have the emails, the financials. From Arthur, the P.I. reports. His affidavit is a work of fiction. We will provide the library of fact that disproves it. Now, sit tight. I'm sending over a courier with some papers for you to sign. I'll call you back in 2 hours. I hung up, the phone slick in my sweaty hand. The rage was still there, a white-hot coal in my chest, but Sarah's cool competence had given it a direction, a purpose. I was not going to be a victim. I was going to be a plaintiff. The house felt like a gilded cage. Every beautiful object, every piece of furniture we'd chosen together, felt like a lie. I was a prisoner in the museum of my own former life. I paced from room to room, the divorce papers clutched in my hand, my mind racing. He had called me disengaged. I thought of the thousands of late nights I'd spent hunched over the books. I thought of the time I'd personally driven across 3 states to pick up a specific, irreplaceable roll of wallpaper for a frantic client, saving the project, disengaged. He had called me uninvolved. I thought of the way I could calm a nervous homeowner, could translate their vague desires into a coherent design plan. I was the one the contractors called when there was a problem because I could solve it without drama. Uninvolved. He had said I squandered money. I thought of the worn-out shoes in my closet, the fact that I still cut coupons, the way I'd patched the lining of my winter coat instead of buying a new one, all so we could reinvest every spare dollar back into Harmony Homes. Squandered. The injustice of it was a physical pain, but it was also my fuel. The courier came and went. I signed the papers, my signature, a sharp, angry slash. As I was sealing the envelope, I heard David's key in the door. My entire body went rigid. This was it. The performance was over. The curtain had been ripped down. He walked in, looking triumphant. He had a slight, smug smile on his face. He saw the broken vase on the floor, the water stain on the rug, and his smile widened. "I see you got my message," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I stood up, holding the envelope for the courier like a shield. "I got your pack of lies, David." "They're not lies, Ruth," he said, shrugging out of his jacket. He looked so comfortable, so in control. "It's just the truth, finally. The truth about our marriage. You've been coasting for years, living off my hard work. It's time for that to end. Your hard work." The words were a whisper, but they crackled with voltage. "You think that business runs on your charm? You think clients sign because of your pretty smile? I am that business, David. I am the one who makes it work. I am the one who keeps it from collapsing under the weight of your ego and your expenses." His smile didn't falter. He actually chuckled. "See? This is what I'm talking about. This delusion of grandeur. You order some fabric, you pay a few bills, and you think you're the CEO. It's sad, Ruth. I'm doing you a favor. The court will see you for what you are, and they'll give you what you deserve. Which isn't much." He walked towards the kitchen, as if the conversation was over. As if my life was a minor administrative matter he had already settled. "I know about Maya," I said to his retreating back. He stopped. He turned around slowly. The smugness was gone, replaced by a cold, flat anger. "What did you say?" I said. "I know about Maya Jensen, the freelance design consultant, the one you bought the sports car for. The one whose apartment you're paying for with money you stole from our company, the one you're cheating on me with." There was a long, heavy silence. The mask was off completely now. The man looking at me was someone I didn't recognize. There was no love, no guilt, not even regret. There was only a calculating, reptilian coldness. "You've been snooping," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I've been discovering," I corrected him. "I've discovered your secret accounts. I've discovered your shell company. I've discovered the second mortgage you took out on our business to buy your condo, and I've discovered that you think I'm pathetic." He took a step towards me. "You have no idea what you're messing with, Ruth. You think a judge is going to care about a few emails? I'll say you were paranoid, that you hacked my computer, that you're making it all up. It's your word against mine. And who do you think they're going to believe? The successful businessman, or the desperate, menopausal housewife?" The word menopausal was a deliberate, vicious jab meant to reduce me, to invalidate me. And for a second, it worked. I felt a hot flush of shame and anger. But then I looked at him, standing there in our home, threatening me, and I saw how small he truly was. I took a step forward, meeting his gaze. I didn't raise my voice. I let the coldness I felt inside seep into my words. "It's not my word against yours, David. It's your word against the forensic accountant's report. It's your word against the private investigator's photographs. It's your word against the bank records. It's your word against the truth." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The ground beneath him was shifting. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. I picked up the courier envelope from the table. "We'll see. My lawyer is filing our response this afternoon. You wanted a war, David. You've got one, but you should know something." I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. I looked back at him, at the man I had loved for 28 years, now a stranger in the ruins of our life. "You were right about one thing in your little story," I said. "You have been carrying me. You've been carrying my hard work, my intelligence, and my loyalty on your back for decades. And now that I'm stepping off, I guess we'll both get to see how long you can stand on your own. I walked out the door, leaving him standing amidst the broken pottery. The preemptive strike had failed. The real battle had just begun. In the aftermath of a bomb blast, there is a ringing silence, and then the slow, desperate sounds of life trying to reassert itself. The days after I walked out of my house were like that. The silence was the absence of David's voice, the absence of the familiar rhythms of my old life. The sounds of life were the frantic calls from creditors, confused by the frozen accounts, the constant back and forth with Sarah Jenkins, and the hollow echo of my own footsteps in Auntie Clara's spare room, which she had insisted I take. "Sentiment is a luxury you can't afford right now," she'd said, her version of a welcome. "This is a command center. Now what's our next move?" Our next move, according to Sarah, was to wait for the hearing to unfreeze the assets and to continue building our case. The problem with waiting when you're under siege is that it gives the enemy time to dig in. And David was digging. His lawyer, a slick, condescending man named Robert Vance, was flooding us with motions and discovery requests, a blizzard of paper designed to overwhelm and bankrupt us with legal fees. He was trying to win by attrition. I felt like I was trapped in a slow-motion nightmare, watching the life I'd built be dismantled by lawyers and lies. The only thing that kept me going was the white-hot core of my anger. It was my fuel, my warmth, my light. It was in the middle of this bleak stalemate that the most unexpected thing happened. I received a message. I was at a coffee shop near Sarah's office, going over another endless stack of financial documents Arthur Lynn had sent over. My phone, set to silent, lit up with a notification. It was a direct message on a professional design forum I sometimes used to source materials. The username was MJ Design 88. The message was simple. "I think we have a mutual problem. His name is David. Can we talk?" It was from Maya. My first instinct was pure, unadulterated rage. The audacity. After everything, to reach out to me? Was this a trap? A scheme orchestrated by David to get me to say something incriminating? I nearly deleted the message right then and there. But I remembered the audio recording from her apartment, the pain in her voice, the sound of the shattering glass. "You lied to me, David." Clara's voice echoed in my head. A scorned woman is a formidable source of information. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a risk, a huge one, but we were losing the war of paperwork. We needed a game changer. I showed the message to Sarah later that day. She steepled her fingers, her expression unreadable. "It's risky. Anything she says could be considered hearsay. But if she has documents, if she's willing to give a sworn affidavit, it could be the nail in his coffin. But you cannot meet her alone. And you cannot say anything that could be construed as threatening or coercing her." So, a meeting was arranged. It felt like something out of a spy novel. We chose a neutral, public place, the atrium of a large museum, surrounded by the silent, judging marble of Roman statues. Sarah came with me, but she sat at a separate table, close enough to observe, far enough away to give the illusion of privacy. I saw Maya before she saw me. She looked diminished. The vibrant young woman from the grocery store was gone. She was pale, her shoulders hunched inside her expensive-looking coat. She looked around nervously before her eyes landed on me. She walked over, her steps hesitant. "Ruth," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maya," I replied, my tone neutral. She sat down, clutching her purse in her lap like a life preserver. There was a long, awkward silence, filled with the distant echoes of school groups and the hum of the climate control system. I didn't know," she blurted out, her eyes welling with tears. "I swear to God, I didn't know. He told me you had an understanding, that you lived separate lives, that the divorce was practically final. He said you were," she trailed off, unable to say the word simple. "He said a lot of things," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "To both of us," she flinched. "I know. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. When I found out, when I realized he was still living with you, that he'd lied about everything, I ended it. I threw him out. And then I started thinking about the money. The car, the apartment, it all felt so dirty. I felt so stupid." She was crying in earnest now, quiet, shame-filled tears. A part of me, the part that had been married for 28 years, wanted to reach out and comfort her. The other part, the part that had been served with divorce papers, wanted to shake her. "Why are you contacting me, Maya?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "What do you want?" She wiped her eyes with a tissue, trying to compose herself. "I want him to pay. I don't know, justice? I feel so used. And I thought, maybe I can help you. And in helping you, I can get some of my self-respect back." She opened her purse and pulled out a small black USB drive. She slid it across the table towards me. "What is this?" I asked, not touching it. "It's everything," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "After our fight, I was so angry. I went through his things at my apartment. He'd left a bag there. I found this. It's a digital copy of his. He called it his insurance file. It has spreadsheets, records of all the money he moved, letters. There's even a video diary he made, talking about the plans for the shell company. I think he was documenting it all to protect himself, or maybe to blackmail his business partners one day. I don't know, but it's all there." I stared at the innocuous-looking little stick. This was it. This was the combination to the safe, the master key. If this was real, it wasn't just our word against his. It was his word against his own. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked again, my suspicion warring with a burgeoning, dizzying hope. "Because he told me you were nothing," she said, her hazel eyes meeting mine, clear and direct for the first time. "He told me you were simple and pathetic and that you wouldn't fight. But you are fighting, aren't you? I saw the legal filings. I looked you up. You built that business with him. You're not what he said you were. And I realized, if he could lie so completely about you, the woman he'd been with for 30 years, then his lies about me were even more meaningless. I was just convenient." In that moment, any lingering hatred I had for her evaporated. She wasn't the enemy. She was just another casualty of David's war on the truth. We were both fools, just different kinds. I picked up the USB drive. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of a man's duplicity. "Thank you, Maya," I said, and I meant it. She gave a small, sad smile. "I'm moving away. I'm selling the car. I can't stand to look at it. I wanted to do one decent thing in the middle of all this mess." She stood up to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Ruth, he's scared. I saw him a few days ago, trying to get me to come back. He's not as in control as he looks. You've got him rattled." And with that, she walked away, disappearing into the museum crowd, a ghost from my husband's other life who had just handed me the keys to my own liberation. Back at Sarah's office, we plugged in the drive. It was all there, just as Maya had said. Spreadsheets more detailed than Arthur's, tracing every illicit dollar. And the video diaries, They were the most damning of all. There was David, sitting in what looked like a hotel room, calmly and arrogantly explaining to the camera how he was siphoning money from Harmony Homes, referring to me as the liability, and talking about his exit strategy. Watching him, so cool and collected as he plotted the destruction of our life together, was more horrifying than any of his angry outbursts. This was premeditated. This was a years-long campaign. Sarah let out a low whistle. "Well," she said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face, "I do believe the tide of the war has just turned. Robert Vance is about to have a very, very bad day." The unlikely ally had delivered the weapon we needed. David's preemptive strike had failed. And now, armed with his own words, his own records, we were ready to launch our counteroffensive. The fool was no longer fooled, and the hunter was about to become the hunted. There is a peculiar numbness that sets in when you confront evidence of your own planned obsolescence. It's not like the sharp, searing pain of the affair or the cold fury of the legal papers. It's a deep, chilling sense of unreality, as if you've stumbled into a story about someone else's life. Watching David on those video diaries from Maya's USB drive was like that. He was a CEO calmly discussing the liquidation of an underperforming asset. And I was the asset. The primary liability is Ruth's emotional attachment to the operational side of the business, he said to the camera, his face a mask of smug rationality. He was in a hotel room I didn't recognize, a glass of whiskey on the table beside him. She lacks the strategic vision to scale. Therefore, a gradual divestment of her influence, coupled with a parallel financial restructuring, is necessary for my future growth. Liability, divestment, restructuring. He was talking about me, about our life. He might as well have been discussing the removal of a faulty appliance. Sarah Jenkins had a field day. "This is better than I could have ever dreamed," she said, her eyes gleaming as we reviewed the files. "He's not just admitting to hiding assets, he's providing a narrated roadmap of his own fraud. The parallel financial restructuring is Apex Design Solutions. The gradual divestment is him cutting you out. A judge will see this for exactly what it is, a cold, calculated plan to destroy his wife financially. We had him, we knew it." The air in Sarah's office, which had been thick with tension for weeks, now crackled with a grim, confident energy. But as Arthur Lynn, our bloodhound forensic accountant, delved deeper into the digital trove, he found a reference that stopped us cold. "There's a recurring line item here," Arthur said, pointing to a spreadsheet on his monitor. "It's not large, but it's consistent. $500 a month, for years, labeled SD. Storage. It's paid out of the Apex account to a company called Secure Hold. It's the only expense from Apex that isn't directly tied to Maya Jensen or the condo." "Storage for what?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. What else had he been hiding? "The company won't tell me without a court order or the client's key," Arthur said. "But the payments started almost 20 years ago." 20 years. This wasn't part of his recent exit strategy. This was something older, something buried deep in the foundation of our marriage. A secret from a time when I still believed our love was unshakable. The thought of it consumed me. I lay awake in Clara's spare room, the ghosts of 20 years of marriage swirling in the darkness. What could he have needed to store in secret for 2 decades? Evidence of another affair? Something illegal? My mind conjured up every terrifying possibility. It was Clara, with her brutal pragmatism, who gave me the answer. "You're wasting energy on speculation," she said over breakfast the next morning, watching me push my scrambled eggs around the plate. The man is a hoarder of secrets. The only way to clean out a hoard is to go in and see what's there. Did he have a hiding place? A favorite book? A locked drawer? And then I remembered. The key. Years ago, maybe 15, David had been given a safety deposit box key by his father. A old, brassy, skeleton key, not like the modern ones banks use now. His father had been a suspicious man, a child of the Depression who trusted mattresses more than banks. He'd rented a box in a private, anonymous vault service, not a major bank. When he passed, David had been dismissive of it. Probably just old war bonds and faded photographs, he'd said, tossing the key into his top desk drawer. I'll deal with it someday. He never did. And in the flurry of his father's estate and the growing success of Harmony Homes, we'd both forgotten about it. The key had sat in that drawer for over a decade, a tiny, metallic piece of forgotten family history. Had he remembered it? Had he started using it? I had to get back into the house, our house, the one I had been served papers in, the one I had walked out of. David was still living there, a king in his crumbling castle. Sarah advised against it. It's still a marital asset, you have a right to be there, but it's a volatile situation, Ruth. I'd rather you didn't. But I had to know. I waited until I knew he would be in a meeting with his lawyer, a meeting Sarah had conveniently scheduled. I drove to my old street, my hands slick on the steering wheel. Using my key felt like a trespass. I pushed the door open, half expecting an alarm to sound, for someone to shout stop. The house was silent. It smelled different of takeout and stale coffee, with a faint, lingering trace of Maya's cheap perfume. The mess was profound. Pizza boxes stacked by the door, unopened mail cascading off the table, a fine layer of dust on every surface. The engine room had shut down, and the whole machine was falling into disrepair. A grim satisfaction curled in my gut. I went straight to the office. The desk drawer was unlocked. I rummaged through paper clips, dried-out pens, and rubber bands. My heart sank. It wasn't there. Of course, he'd moved it. He'd probably thrown it away. But then I remembered his father, a man who hid things. David was his father's son. I looked around the room. Where would a man who hides money in shell companies hide a key? My eyes fell on his beloved set of leather-bound classic novels. He never read them, they were for show. I went to the shelf and started pulling them out, shaking them. Moby Dick, nothing. War and Peace, nothing. Then I pulled out a thick, faux antique copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, a story about betrayal and hidden treasure. The irony was almost too much. It felt heavier than it should. I opened it. The pages had been hollowed out, and inside, nestled in the perfect, book-shaped cavity, was the old brass key. I grabbed it, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't waste another second. I drove directly to the address printed on the key's fob, a nondescript brick building in a part of town that had seen better days. The lobby of Secure Hold was dim and smelled of old carpet and disinfectant. A bored-looking clerk sat behind a bulletproof glass window. I slid the key under the glass. I'd like to access my box, please. He took the key, checked it against a logbook, and shrugged. Number 217. Down the hall, to the left. You know the drill. I did not know the drill, but I followed his directions to a large vault-like door that was standing open, revealing a room filled with walls of small, metal doors. I found number 217. My hand trembled as I inserted the key. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click. The box was shallow. Inside, there were no stacks of cash, no jewels. There was only a single, faded manila folder. I lifted it out, my pulse roaring in my ears. I carried it to a small, private viewing booth and sat down. I opened the folder. On top was a will. A last will and testament of David Miller, dated just 6 months ago. It superseded the one we had made together, the one that left everything to me and then to charity if we had no children. This new will was stark and brutal. It left his entire estate, including his share of Harmony Homes, to a name I had never seen before, Liam Michael Doyle. Who the hell is Liam Michael Doyle? Beneath the will was a stack of bank statements from an account in the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary of the account was also Liam Michael Doyle. The deposits were the $500 monthly payments, compounded over years into a staggering sum. And beneath that, the piece of paper that truly broke me. It was a birth certificate. The father's name, David Miller. The mother's name, Colleen Doyle. The child's name, Liam Michael Doyle. Date of birth, 22 years ago. 22 years. The numbers swam before my eyes. 22. We had been married for 28. He had a child, a son. He had a son when we were 6 years into our marriage, when we were supposedly at our happiest, when we were building Harmony Homes together. When he would come home and tell me about his day and kiss me and tell me he loved me. The numbness returned, but this time it was different. It was the absolute zero of feeling, the void where a world once existed. The affairs, the stolen money, the legal battles, they were wounds. This was an amputation. He hadn't just been unfaithful, he had created an entire branch of his life, a lineage that I knew nothing about. While I was worrying about my biological clock, while I was grieving the children we never had, he already had a son. He was a father, and he had chosen to keep it from me for over 2 decades. I sat in that sterile, silent booth for a long time, the papers spread out before me. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I was in the eye of the hurricane, in a place of perfect, terrible calm. He hadn't just been building an escape route for the last few years. He had been living a double life for most of our marriage. The secret ledger wasn't just a financial record. It was the ledger of his soul, and the balance was monstrous. I carefully, methodically, placed every document back into the folder. I placed the folder back into the safety deposit box. I locked it. I walked out of secure hold, the key clutched in my hand, a tiny, cold piece of metal that had just unlocked the truth about my entire life. I got into my car, and I called Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Cancel whatever you're doing. We need to talk." It turns out the financial fraud and the adultery were just the opening acts. We've just found the main event. David has a son, a secret son, and he's been hiding him from me for 22 years. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Then I heard Sarah let out a slow, measured breath. "Well," she said, her voice a mix of horror and professional awe. "That changes everything." The fool was gone. In her place was a woman armed with a truth so devastating, it could not only win a divorce, but shatter a legacy. The war was no longer about money. It was about history. It was about truth. And I was now the keeper of both. A secret child is not just a person, it's a ghost. A phantom limb of a family tree you never knew was amputated. For days after finding the birth certificate, I felt haunted. Every memory from 22 years ago was now suspect. That business trip to Seattle? Had he been meeting her? That time he was too stressed to try for a baby? Had it been because he already had one? My past had been retroactively poisoned, every happy moment shadowed by the specter of his betrayal. The question was no longer if we would use this information, but how. Sarah was ecstatic in her cool, lawyerly way. "This is predatory behavior of the highest order," she stated. "It demonstrates a long-standing pattern of deceit that completely undermines his claim of being a trustworthy business partner and a man of good character. It makes his entire narrative look like the fiction it is. But I wasn't ready to unleash this particular ghost in a courtroom. I needed to understand it first. I needed to see the face of this shadow that had lived in the margins of my life for so long. We need to find him," I told Arthur Lynn. "Liam Doyle, I need to know who he is." In the digital age, ghosts are easier to find. Within 48 hours, Arthur had a dossier. Liam Michael Doyle, 22 years old, a senior at a prestigious university on the West Coast, studying engineering. Dean's List. No criminal record. His social media profiles, which were set to private, showed a thumbnail picture of a young man with dark, serious eyes and a smile that was unmistakably David's. My heart clenched. He was handsome. He looked intelligent. He was a stranger who shared DNA with the man I'd shared my life with. His mother, Colleen Doyle, was a graphic designer. She had never married. She lived a quiet, seemingly content life in a small town a few hours away from where David had gone to college. There were no pictures of David in her online presence. It was as if he had never existed. The story wrote itself. A college romance. An unplanned pregnancy. David, ambitious, with his whole life ahead of him, had chosen his career and his clean, uncomplicated future with me over the messy reality of a child. He had paid them off. The $500 a month was the hush money, the financial seal on their silence. But recently, something had changed. The new will, the Cayman Island account. He was bringing Liam into the fold. Why now? "He's grooming him," Clara said bluntly when I showed her the picture. She tapped the photo of Liam with a bony finger. "David is getting older. He sees his mortality on the horizon. He has no other heirs. He's realized the son he discarded is his only legacy. He's probably been reconnecting with him, telling him a revised version of history. I'd wager he's painting you as the obstacle, the witch who kept them apart." The thought made me nauseous. Not only had David stolen my past, he was now trying to steal my future by turning his secret son against me, bequeathing him the company I helped build. We were in a standoff. We had the ultimate weapon, but using it felt like dropping a bomb on a young man who had done nothing wrong but be born. I was trapped between my righteous fury and a bewildering sense of pity for this ghost boy. The decision was taken out of my hands. I was meeting Sarah at her office to discuss the deposition strategy when her assistant buzzed in, her voice nervous. "Miss Jenkins, there's a young man here to see you. He says his name is Liam Doyle. He says it's about the Miller case." The air left the room. Sarah and I stared at each other. The ghost had walked out of the machine and into the waiting room. "Did you contact him?" I whispered, my heart in my throat. "No," Sarah said, her eyes narrowed. "But someone did." She pressed the intercom. "Send him in." The door opened, and he stepped inside. He was taller in person, lanky, with an air of nervous intensity. He wore jeans and a university sweatshirt, and he clutched a backpack like a shield. He looked from Sarah to me, and his eyes, David's eyes, widened in recognition. He knew who I was. "Miss Jenkins?" he said, his voice deeper than I expected. "I'm Liam Doyle. I think I might have some information about David Miller." "Please have a seat, Liam," Sarah said, her tone neutral, professional. She gestured to the chair opposite me. He sat, perching on the edge, his gaze flicking towards me again. "This is my client, Ruth Miller," Sarah said. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. I'm sorry to just show up like this." He looked directly at me. "I'm sorry for everything." The apology was so unexpected, so raw, that I couldn't speak. "What brings you here today, Liam?" Sarah asked, gently steering him. He took a deep breath. "He contacted me about a year ago, out of the blue. Said he'd been thinking about me, that he wanted to be part of my life. He started flying me out for visits, talking to me about his business. It was amazing. I'd spent my whole life wondering about him, and suddenly, there he was. He was smart, successful. He seemed to really care." He paused, his knuckles white where he gripped his backpack. "Then, a few months ago, he started talking about his will. He said he wanted to leave everything to me. He said his wife. He said you." He looked at me, pained. "Were trying to destroy the company out of spite. That you were unstable and greedy, and that you'd never really loved him. He said I was his true family, his only heir." Hearing David's lies come out of this boy's mouth was a fresh kind of agony. But I stayed silent, letting him talk. "I believed him," Liam said, his voice thick with shame. "Why wouldn't I? He was my father. Then, last week, I found a box of my mom's old things in the attic. I was looking for my baby pictures. And I found the original custody and support agreement." He unzipped his backpack and pulled out a faded legal-sized document. He handed it to Sarah. "He forced my mom to sign it," Liam said, his voice trembling with a new hard edge. "He gave her a lump sum and those monthly payments, but only if she promised never to contact him again, never to tell anyone he was the father. He threatened to ruin her family if she didn't. She was 21. She was scared. She signed away his rights, and he signed away any responsibility beyond the money." He looked at me, his eyes now blazing with a fury I knew all too well. "He didn't come back into my life because he had a change of heart. He came back because he's a narcissist who needs a mirror. He has no one else. You were leaving him, and he was alone. He didn't want a son, he wanted a spare part. The room was silent. The ghost wasn't a victim anymore. He was a witness, and he was on our side. Why are you telling us this, Liam?" I asked, my voice soft. "Because I'm not a spare part," he said, his jaw set. "And I don't want his blood money. I don't want anything from him. My mom raised me. She's my family. He's just a donor." And after reading that agreement, after seeing what he did to her and what he's trying to do to you. He shook his head. "I can't be part of it. I won't." He stood up. "I'll testify. I'll tell the judge everything he told me about you. I'll give you that agreement. I wanted you to know that I'm not with him. I'm not part of his plan. He was just a boy. A brave, hurt, principled boy who had been used as a pawn in his own father's game. And in that moment, any lingering anger I had towards him or his mother vanished, replaced by a profound and aching sadness. "Thank you, Liam," I said, and I meant it from the bottom of my shattered heart. He gave a curt nod, shouldered his backpack, and left as quickly as he had arrived. Sarah let out a long, low whistle. "Well, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have never, ever seen anything like that." She picked up the custody agreement. "This, combined with the secret will and the video diaries, Ruth, this isn't just a winning case. This is a demolition." The ghost in the machine had not only been benign, He had become our most powerful ally. David, in his infinite arrogance, had tried to secure his legacy by recruiting his son. Instead, he had created the instrument of his own total and utter destruction. The walls were not just closing in, they were falling down, and he was standing in the center, completely unaware that the heir to his throne had just set the charges. A courtroom is a sterile temple where human chaos is forced into the neat, tight boxes of procedure and law. There is no room for screaming, for throne vases, for the raw, messy truth of a broken heart. Everything is distilled into questions, objections, and exhibits. Walking into that room on the first day of the hearing felt like walking onto a stage for a play where I didn't know my lines, but the lead actor was trying to burn down the theater. David was already there, sitting at the defendant's table with Robert Vance. He looked polished, confident in a sharp, expensive suit. But I saw the tightness in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine. He looked like a man who had built a house of cards and could hear the first whispers of a wind he hadn't forecast. I sat beside Sarah Jenkins, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. I wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress. Clara's advice had been, "Don't look like a victim, don't look like an avenger, look like a competent woman who has been grievously wronged. Let the facts do the screaming for you." The judge, an older woman with a stern, intelligent face and silver hair pulled into a severe bun, entered. Judge Irene Moore. Sarah had said she was no nonsense and had a particular dislike for spouses who tried to hide money. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. The first day was a dry, brutal slog through financials. Robert Vance stood and painted his picture, David, the visionary entrepreneur, and Ruth, the disinterested wife who now sought to cash in on his success. He presented inflated numbers for my personal spending and made it sound like my management of the accounts was a frivolous hobby. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood, calm and poised. "Your Honor, if we may, we'd like to adjust the narrative counsel is constructing," she began, her voice clear and carrying. "The story isn't about a disinterested wife. It's about a betrayed partner, and we have the defendant's own words to prove it." She entered the video diaries into evidence. Robert Vance objected vehemently, but Judge Moore overruled him. "I'd like to see what the defendant has to say for himself," she said, her tone dry. A screen was set up. And there, in the hushed courtroom, David's voice filled the room. "The primary liability is Ruth's emotional attachment, a gradual divestment of her influence, parallel financial restructuring." I didn't watch the screen. I watched David. I saw the color drain from his face. I saw the way his hand clenched into a fist on the table. He had never imagined his own arrogant monologues would be played back to him in a room full of strangers, under the dispassionate gaze of a judge. This was his first reckoning. The cold, calculating monster he'd been in that hotel room was being exposed, and the confident businessman in the courtroom was shrinking under its shadow. Robert Vance did his best on cross-examination. He tried to make me look money-hungry, asking why I felt entitled to half of a business I allegedly didn't build. I took a breath, remembering Sarah's coaching. "Answer the question, but tell your story." "It wasn't about entitlement, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It was about partnership. I wasn't an employee. I was the co-founder. I handled the logistics, the accounting, the client relations, the problem-solving. David was the front man. We were a team. I trusted him to manage the outward face of our business, just as he trusted me to manage its heart and its books. That trust was the foundation. And I looked directly at David, He systematically dismantled that foundation to build a secret life. Vance quickly sat down. The second day, we brought in Arthur Lynn. With cool, clinical precision, he walked the court through the flow charts, the money from Harmony Homes to Apex Design, to the secret accounts, to Maya's car, her apartment, the secret condo. It was a symphony of deception, and Arthur was its meticulous conductor. Vance's attempts to trip him up were futile. Arthur dealt only in numbers, and the numbers told a damning story. But the true reckoning came on the third day. The day we called Liam Doyle to the stand. You could have heard a pin drop as he walked to the witness box. He was pale but composed, sworn in with a clear voice. Sarah approached him gently. "Mr. Doyle, can you state your relationship to the defendant, David Miller?" Liam's eyes met David's across the room. David's expression was one of pure, unadulterated panic. "He is my biological father," Liam said. A ripple went through the courtroom. Sarah led him through his story, the sudden contact, the gifts, the promises, the stories about me. And then she handed him the custody agreement. "Can you tell the court what this is?" Liam's voice grew stronger, laced with a righteous anger. "This is the agreement my mother was forced to sign 22 years ago. It gave her a lump sum and child support in exchange for her silence and his complete absence from my life. He threatened her if she didn't comply." Robert Vance was on his feet, objecting, shouting about relevance. Judge Moore silenced him with a look. "The witness's testimony goes directly to the character of the defendant and his propensity for secrecy and manipulation. I'll allow it. Continue, Miss Jenkins." Then Sarah played her masterstroke. She entered David's secret will into evidence, the one that left everything to Liam, disinheriting me completely. "When did you learn about this will, Mr. Doyle?" Sarah asked. "He told me about it a few months ago," Liam said. "He said he was leaving me everything because I was his true family. He said his wife was unstable and greedy." "And what is your response to that bequest now?" Liam looked directly at the judge. "I don't want it. I renounce it. I want no part of anything that comes from hurting someone else. My father didn't come back for me. He came back for himself." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the most powerful testimony I had ever heard. It wasn't just about money. It was about the utter corruption of a soul. When it was Robert Vance's turn for cross-examination, he was flustered, angry. He tried to imply that Liam was a scorned child making up stories. Liam didn't flinch. "I have a mother who loved me enough for two parents, Mr. Vance. The only thing I'm scorned about is the fact that my biological father is a man who would threaten a young woman and try to destroy the wife who stood by him for 28 years. I'm not the one on trial here for my character." Vance, defeated, dismissed him. Then it was David's turn. He took the stand, his arrogance finally shattered. He looked hollowed out. Under Sarah's relentless questioning, his story unraveled. He tried to claim the video diaries were theoretical business musings. He said the money to Maya was loans and bonuses. He claimed he'd reconnected with Liam out of a sense of duty. But Sarah just kept presenting the evidence. The condo deed, the car registration, the secret bank statements. With each piece of paper, his shoulders slumped further. He was a liar caught in a web of his own making, and every path he took led him deeper into the sticky threads of his deceit. The final question Sarah asked him was simple. "Mr. Miller, is it your testimony that your wife, Ruth Miller, the woman you described in your affidavit as disengaged and a squanderer of funds, was in fact the operational and financial manager of your multi-million-dollar business for 28 years?" David looked at me. For a fleeting second, I saw not a monster, but the ghost of the man I'd loved trapped, ashamed, and utterly broken. He knew he was beaten. He looked down at his hands. "Yes," he whispered. "Thank you," Sarah said. No further questions. The reckoning was complete. He had been forced, under oath, in a court of law, to speak the truth he had spent years running from. The liar had been cornered by his own lies, and the facade had crumbled to dust. There was no fight left in him. The victory wasn't sweet. It was solemn, like a verdict delivered after a long and terrible plague. The truth was finally, officially, on the record. They say karma is a boomerang. You throw it out into the world, and eventually it comes back to you. For days after David's testimony, I waited for the judge's ruling, expecting the boomerang to land in the form of a favorable settlement. I never imagined it would return as a wrecking ball, swung by the unlikeliest of demolition crews. It started with a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another journalist sniffing around the scandalous trial. "Ruth Miller?" a woman's voice asked. It was familiar, but I couldn't place it. "Yes?" "It's Carol Henderson." My mind raced. Carol Henderson. The client? The one with the demanding marble and the superstitious need for a separate account? Why was she calling me? "Carol, hello, is everything all right with the project?" I asked, my professional instincts kicking in even amidst my personal chaos. "The project is fine, Ruth. More than fine, thanks to you. That's why I'm calling." She paused, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. "I've been reading about the proceedings in the paper, and I have to say, the picture David's lawyer is painting of you is not the woman I know. You've been nothing but professional, competent, and honest with us." A lump formed in my throat. "Thank you, Carol. That means a great deal." "It's more than that," she said, her voice lowering. "My husband, Ben, he plays golf with Robert Vance. Last night, Vance was bragging about his strategy. He was quite loose-lipped after a few scotches." My grip tightened on the phone. "What did he say?" "He said that David's case was a sinking ship, but that he had one last trick up his sleeve. He said he was going to introduce evidence of your financial impropriety. He claims you were funneling money to a relative, an Aunt Grace, for years, skimming from the business." I felt the blood drain from my face. Auntie Grace, the sweet, gentle soul who lived on a fixed income? David knew I sometimes helped her out with small things, a new water heater, a surprise trip to see her sister. He'd even encouraged it, calling it a kindness. To twist that, to weaponize my compassion against me. It was a new low, even for him. "Carol, that's not true," I stammered. "I've helped my aunt, yes, but with my own money, from my personal account, never from the business." "I believe you, Ruth," Carol said firmly. "But that's not the point. The point is, hearing Vance say that, so smugly, it made my blood boil. And it got me thinking. That separate account David insisted on for our retainer, it never sat right with me. So I had my accountant look into it." She took a deep breath. "The money we paid into that separate Apex account, it wasn't just for our project. Our payments were being used to cover the shortfalls he was creating by siphoning money for his mistress. He used our money, Ruth. He committed fraud against us, the world tilted on its axis. In his greed, David hadn't just stolen from me, he'd stolen from his clients. He had tangled his web of lies around the wrong person." "Carol, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," she said, her voice now sharp as a blade. but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. My lawyer is drafting a lawsuit against David Miller and Harmony Homes for fraud and breach of contract, and we won't be the only ones. I've already spoken to 2 other clients from that same time period. They're livid. We're all filing together. Karma. It wasn't a silent cosmic force. It was a well-connected, righteously angry woman named Carol Henderson. This will destroy the business, I whispered, the full implication hitting me. The company we'd built, the entity at the center of this entire war, would be annihilated by lawsuits. It was already destroyed, Ruth, Carol said, not unkindly. David destroyed it the moment he decided to be a thief. We're just formalizing the obituary. I thought you should hear it from me first, and I wanted to ask, would you be willing to testify? About the shell company, about the financial flows, it would help our case immensely. I didn't even have to think. Yes, of course, I will. I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. I immediately called Sarah and told her everything. Sarah was silent for a moment, then she burst out laughing. It was a rich, hearty, astonished laugh. Oh, that is beautiful, that is perfect. He tried to throw your aunt under the bus, and instead, he's brought a freight train down on his own head. The next day, in court, Robert Vance stood to make his final arguments. He looked tired, defeated, but he had one last burst of fight. Your Honor, he began, while my client has acknowledged certain missteps, we must also consider the plaintiff's own lack of financial probity. We have evidence that she was funneling marital funds to a relative, a pattern of behavior that he never got to finish. Sarah stood up. Your Honor, if I may interrupt, I believe counsel is about to waste the court's time with a thoroughly debunked theory. Furthermore, I have just been made aware of a material change in circumstances that directly impacts the valuation of the marital estate, which is the subject of these proceedings. She handed a document to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. This is a notice of a civil lawsuit for fraud, filed this morning by Henderson Holdings, along with 2 other former clients of Harmony Homes, against Mr. Miller. The business, Your Honor, is not an asset. It is now a massive liability. Its value, for the purpose of equitable distribution, is effectively 0. In fact, it is negative. The color drained from David's face so completely I thought he might pass out. Robert Vance stood frozen, his mouth agape. He had been about to play his last dirty card, and Sarah had not only snatched it from his hand but had set the entire card table on fire. Judge Moore put on her reading glasses and scanned the document. Her face was impassive. She looked up at David, her gaze like granite. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice cold and clear. It appears your financial and ethical mismanagement extends far beyond the confines of this marriage. This court will not waste its time adjudicating the division of a sinking ship that is currently being torpedoed by its own captain. She turned to Sarah. Counsel, I have seen and heard more than enough. The court finds the defendant's testimony to be largely not credible. His actions constitute intentional dissipation of marital assets, fraud, and a profound breach of fiduciary duty. Given the evolution of the situation with the business, I am ready to issue my ruling on the remaining assets. What followed was a thing of brutal, beautiful justice. Judge Moore awarded me the full title to our home, free and clear. She awarded me the entirety of our remaining retirement and investment accounts. She awarded me the secret condo, the one he'd bought for his future with Maya. She imposed a hefty judgment for my legal fees to be paid by David. And due to his egregious and intentional waste of marital assets, She ordered him to pay me a lump sum settlement equivalent to the value of the funds he had stolen, a number Arthur Lynn had meticulously calculated. She left him with the business that was now drowning in lawsuits, its reputation in tatters, its value evaporated. She had given him the anchor and thrown him overboard. The gavel fell. It was over. I looked across the room at David. He was a shell. The arrogance, the confidence, the smugness all gone. He was just a middle-aged man who had lost his wife, his home, his money, his mistress, his son, and now his life's work, all in one fell swoop. He had wanted to leave me with nothing. Instead, he had engineered a situation where he was left with less than nothing, a mountain of debt and a legacy of shame. As we walked out of the courtroom, he stumbled towards me, his eyes desperate. "Ruth, please, you have to. The lawsuits, you can talk to Carol Henderson. You have to help me." I stopped and looked at him, the man who had called me pathetic. There was no anger left in me. Just a vast, quiet emptiness. "No, David," I said, my voice calm. "I don't." I turned and walked away, down the marbled hallway, towards the large, heavy doors that led to the outside world. Sarah walked beside me, a quiet satisfaction on her face. Clara was waiting in the lobby, her expression one of grim victory. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the sunlight. It was a bright, clear day. The air felt different, it felt free. The karmic twist had not just been a victory in a legal sense. It had been a restoration of balance. He had been exposed, not just to me, but to the world. He had been punished, not by me, but by the very consequences of his own actions. I had walked into that courtroom fighting for my survival. I walked out of it having witnessed the universe, in its own strange and timely way, settle the score. There is a silence that comes after the last echo of a gavel has faded, after the legal documents have been signed and notarized, after the war is officially, irrevocably over. It is not the anxious silence of waiting, nor the heavy silence of grief. This silence is spacious. It is a vast, clean, empty room in the heart of your soul, waiting for you to decide what to fill it with. The first thing I did was go back to the house, my house, the one the judge had given me, free and clear of the man who had shared it with me for 28 years. Sarah had arranged for a locksmith to meet me there. As I watched him drill out the old lock and install a new, gleaming one, I felt a symbolic finality that was even more profound than the judge's ruling. I was changing the locks. I was locking my old life out, and my new one in. The key felt heavy and new in my hand. I turned it, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The place was a tomb to a dead marriage. The mess David had left in his final, frantic weeks was still there, the dust, the take-out containers, the general air of neglect. But it was more than that. It was the ghost of his presence, the lingering energy of his betrayal. It smelled of lies. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt like an archaeologist who had just been granted sole access to a dig site of her own life. I was surrounded by artifacts, and I had to decide which were treasures and which were merely rubble. I started in the living room. I picked up the shattered pieces of the vase I'd broken months ago, my hands no longer trembling. I swept them into a dustpan and threw them away. That act, so simple, so mundane, felt like my first official decree as the new ruler of this domain. The destruction ends now. I called a cleaning service and booked them for a deep, top-to-bottom cleanse. Then, I called a charity to come and collect his things. I didn't want to touch them, to sift through his clothes and his trinkets. I didn't want the energy of that task. I simply wanted it gone. While I waited for them to arrive, I did only one thing for myself. I went into the bedroom, our bedroom, and I stripped the bed. I tore the sheets, the duvet, the pillows, everything that had held the scent of him, the memory of us lying back to back in that cold chasm, and I stuffed it all into heavy-duty garbage bags. I would burn them later. Then I went to the linen closet and pulled out a set of sheets I'd bought years ago but never used, a beautiful, crisp, floral pattern he had deemed too fussy. I made the bed, smoothing the new sheets, fluffing the new pillows. It was a fresh canvas. Auntie Grace came over later that day, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and sorrow. She walked through the rooms, her hand over her heart. "Oh, my dear girl, what he did to this home, what he did to you." But Auntie Clara, who arrived shortly after, simply nodded in approval. "Good. You're clearing the rot. Don't stop until it's all gone." The charity truck came. I stood in the doorway and watched strangers carry out boxes of David's life, his golf clubs, his rows of identical suits, his collection of expensive watches. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no sadness. It was like watching leaves being raked up after a storm. It was just cleanup. The final piece of business was Harmony Homes. The shell of the company was still his, as per the judge's ruling, but it was a corpse picked clean by the vultures of litigation. Carol Henderson's lawsuit had been the first of 3. The business phone was disconnected. The website was taken down. The physical office space was still under lease, however, and it was filled with furniture, samples, and decades of project files. I went there one last time. The air was stale. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light cutting through the blinds. My desk was exactly as I'd left it the day I'd walked out for the last time, a half-finished fabric swatchboard for the Hendersons still laid out. His office was a mess of empty coffee cups and frantic, scribbled notes, the frantic scrawlings of a drowning man. I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here for salvage. I had an idea, a tiny, fragile seed of a thought that had been planted in the spacious silence of my new life. I spent the day going through the filing cabinets, not the financial ones. Arthur had all that, but the project archives. I pulled every file for every job I had personally loved, where my vision and my hard work had resulted in something beautiful. I took the supplier lists, the client testimonials, the photographs of finished rooms that made my heart sing. I was curating my own portfolio, separating my legacy from his wreckage. As I was loading the last box into my car, a familiar sedan pulled up. David got out. He looked shrunken. His clothes were rumpled, his face was gaunt. The lawsuits were clearly taking their toll. "Ruth," he said, his voice raspy, "what are you doing?" "Taking what's mine," I said, my tone even. "My work, my ideas." He looked at the box, then back at the empty office. "It's all gone, everything we built. You tore it down, David," I said, not unkindly, but with a finality that brooked no argument. "I'm just collecting the blueprints so I can build something new." He shook his head, a gesture of utter defeat. "I never meant for it to go this far." That was the closest I would ever get to an apology. And it was worthless. It wasn't an admission of guilt for the betrayal, for the secret son, for the years of lies. It was regret that he'd been caught. Regret that his punishment was so severe. "Goodbye, David," I said. I got into my car and started the engine. I looked at him one last time in my rearview mirror, a lone, pathetic figure standing in the empty parking lot of his own ruin. He was still standing there as I turned the corner and drove out of his life for good. I didn't drive home. I drove to the ocean. I parked the car, walked down to the beach, and stood at the water's edge, letting the cold, salty wind whip my hair. I took the new house key out of my pocket and held it tight in my fist. Then, I took a deep, lung-bursting breath of the clean, wild air and I screamed. I screamed out all the pain, the anger, the fear, the humiliation. I screamed until my throat was raw, giving it all to the wind and the waves. When I was done, I was empty. Truly, cleanly empty. The walkout wasn't just the physical act of leaving the courtroom or the office. It was this moment of standing on the edge of the world, having shed the weight of a lifetime, and feeling the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of the unknown. I had walked out of the battle, out of the marriage, out of the identity of David's wife. I had walked out of the fool's paradise and into the clear, bright, uncertain light of my own future. I was victorious not because I had taken everything from him, but because I had given myself back to me. And as I turned from the ocean and walked back to my car, the new key a comforting weight in my pocket, I knew that whatever I built next would be entirely, authentically my own. Rebuilding a life is nothing like building a house. There are no blueprints, no permits, no predictable timeline. It is a slow, often messy, process of trial and error. It begins not with a foundation, but with a single, conscious choice, to pick up one piece and then another, and to see what you can make of them. My first choice was paint. I decided to paint the living room. The color it had been was a safe, neutral beige that David had chosen. I went to the hardware store and stood before a wall of color samples, feeling a thrill of panic and possibility. I chose a color called Tranquil Dawn, a soft, warm gray with a hint of blue. It took me 3 days. I got paint in my hair, on my clothes, on the drop cloth. I made a mess. And when I was done, and I moved the furniture back and stood looking at the walls, I cried. They were my walls. They were the color of my new beginning. That small act gave me the courage for a bigger one. I sold the secret condo, the one David had bought with the second mortgage. I didn't want it. I didn't need a monument to his infidelity. The proceeds, combined with the settlement from David, meant I was financially secure for the rest of my life. The engine room was finally, fully, her own captain. With the practicalities of survival handled, the real work began, the rebuilding of Ruth. I started seeing a therapist, a kind, unshockable woman named Dr. Evans, who helped me sift through the rubble of my past without getting cut on the shards. I learned that my trust wasn't foolish, it was a strength he had exploited. I learned that my desire to see the best in people wasn't a weakness, but that I needed to balance it with the wisdom to see them as they truly are. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage. I took a pottery class. I traveled. Not to the Amalfi Coast, that was tainted now, but to places I had always wanted to see, the rainforests of Costa Rica, the art museums of Madrid. I learned to eat alone in restaurants, to go to the movies by myself, to enjoy the sound of my own company. And I started a new business. It wasn't called Harmony Homes. I called it Ruthless Design. Clara had laughed her dry, cackling laugh when I told her. Perfect, she'd said. It tells them you've been through the fire and you won't tolerate nonsense. Ruthless Design was small, just me. I didn't want a team. I didn't want the stress of managing people. I used the portfolio I'd salvaged from the old office, and I began taking on clients who wanted a personalized, deeply collaborative experience. I worked from a sun-drenched studio I created in the second bedroom of my house, surrounded by my fabric samples and paint swatches. I was the vision, the engine, and the face, and it was a modest, but deeply satisfying success. One afternoon, about a year after the divorce was final, I was working on a design plan for a young couple when my doorbell rang. It was a delivery man with a long, flat box. Puzzled, I brought it inside and opened it. Inside was a painting. It was an abstract, a swirl of stormy grays and deep blues, with a single, brilliant streak of gold cutting through the center, like dawn breaking after a long night. It was powerful and hopeful. There was no note. Few days later, I received an email from Liam. "Dear Ruth, I hope it's okay that I'm writing to you. I saw that painting at a student art show and it made me think of you. My mom told me what happened at the trial, how you stood up to him. I just wanted to say, thank you for your strength. It gave me strength too. I've decided to change my last name to my mother's maiden name. I'm not his legacy. I'm my own. I hope you're well." Liam I wrote him back, a simple, heartfelt note of thanks for the painting and my support for his decision. We didn't become pen pals, but a bridge of mutual respect had been built across the chasm his father had created. Another piece of my world settled into place. The most profound moment of rebuilding, however, came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was in my garden, wrestling with a stubborn rose bush, my hands buried in the dark, rich soil. The sun was on my back, and I was sweating, frustrated, and completely absorbed in the task. And in that moment, I realized something. I was happy. Not the performative happiness of a social media post, not the fleeting happiness of a good meal, but a deep, quiet, cellular contentment. I was at peace. The war was not just over. Its battlefields had been covered over with new growth. I had rebuilt a life, not on the foundation of a partnership, but on the bedrock of my own character. I had built a life of quiet mornings, meaningful work, cherished friendships, and the unshakable knowledge that I could face whatever came next on my own 2 feet. The fool was gone, the victim was gone. In their place was a woman of substance, of wisdom, of hard-won peace. The rebuilding was complete. Now it was time to live. If you had told me 5 years ago that I would be sitting here, in my sun-filled studio, speaking my truth into a microphone for strangers to hear, I would have called you delusional. The Ruth I was then believed her story was a private one, to be shared only in whispers with close friends over cups of tea. But I've learned that a story kept in the dark festers, while a story brought into the light can heal not just the teller, but the listener, too. So here I am. I'm Ruth. I'm 57 years old, and I have a lesson to share. It's not a simple lesson, and it didn't come cheaply. It was paid for with 28 years of my life, with tears that felt like they would never end, and with a pain that carved out the person I used to be to make space for the person I am now. My dear ones, if you take nothing else from my long and winding story, please take this. Your kindness is not your weakness, and your trust is not your folly. For so long, I believed I was a fool. David told me I was, and I believed him. I thought my willingness to believe in him, to build a life with him, to trust him with my heart and my labor, was a character flaw. I thought I was naive. I was wrong. The flaw was not in my trust. The flaw was in his character. There is a special kind of evil in taking a person's greatest strength, their capacity for love, for loyalty, for faith, and twisting it into a weapon to use against them. Do not let anyone who does that to you convince you that you are the one who is broken. You are not the fool for trusting. They are the fool for betraying a sacred gift. The second lesson is this: the most powerful revenge is not destruction, it is creation. When I was in the depths of it, I fantasized about all sorts of revenge. I wanted him to hurt as I was hurting. I wanted him to lose everything. And in a way, he did. But my victory was not in his loss. My victory was in what I built from the ashes he left behind. I created a new home, one that reflects my soul, not a compromise. I created a new business, one that runs on my terms, with my integrity at its core. I created a new peace, a stillness in my spirit that no storm can shatter. I created a life I am proud of. By focusing on building my own world, I became untouchable. His karma was his to deal with. My creation was mine to enjoy. Which brings me to the third lesson: you must become the safe you wish you had. For months I was a vault, sealed shut, containing all my rage and hurt. It was a survival tactic, but after the battle is over, you cannot remain locked away. You have to learn to open yourself up again. Not to everyone, and not recklessly, but wisely. You have to learn to trust your own judgment above all else. You have to become the source of your own security. No one is coming to save you, and that is the most liberating realization of all. When you know that you are your own rescue party, you stop waiting on the shore for a ship that may never come in. You build your own boat. I look at my life now. The painting from Liam hangs in my studio, that slash of gold a daily reminder that light always finds a way through the darkest clouds. My business, Ruthless Design, is a testament to the fact that I can be both kind and strong, both compassionate and unwavering in my standards. My friendships with Auntie Grace and Auntie Clara are deeper than ever, because I now bring my whole, authentic self to them, not just the parts I thought were acceptable. I even have a relationship with David's son, with Liam. A respectful, distant one, but it exists. It is a relationship that acknowledges the past without being chained to it, a testament to the fact that grace can grow in the most unlikely places. As for David, I hear snippets through the grapevine. The lawsuits bankrupted him. He moved to another state, trying to start over. I feel no hatred for him. I feel nothing. And that is the final, and perhaps most surprising, lesson. Indifference is the true opposite of love, not hate. Hate is a bond. It ties you to the person you despise. It gives them power over your emotions. Indifference is a release. It is the cutting of the final cord. I don't wish him well, and I don't wish him ill. I am simply unconcerned with his existence. His story is no longer intertwined with mine. My narrative is my own. So, my dear ones, this is where Auntie Ruth's story ends, and where yours continues. If you are in the thick of your own battle, if you feel like a fool, if you are trusting someone who does not deserve it, please know this: I see you, I have been you. The path out is paved with small, brave choices. Change the lock, paint the wall, scream into the ocean. Pick up one piece of your shattered self and decide what you will make of it. You are not a fool. You are a phoenix, covered in ash, waiting for the moment to remember that you were born to fly. The world will try to convince you that your fire is a danger, that your wings are a liability. Do not believe it. Your fire is your truth. Your wings are your freedom. Now go. Be ruthless in your self-love. Be relentless in your pursuit of peace. And never, ever apologize for the magnificent person you are, scars and all. Walk out of whatever cage you find yourself in, and walk out victorious. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.